Hey everyone, my name's Joe.
And I'm Mike.
And you're listening to How Many Fingers Am I Holding Up? The podcast. And this week, we'll be reviewing Don't Think Twice.
Don't think twice. Unless you're going to ask Mike Birbiglia a harmless question.
Welcome to How Many Fingers Am I Holding Up? Featuring two guys getting rat-arsed and reviewing movies.
Rat-arsed. Rat-arsed.
Rat-arsed and reviewing movies in a weekly podcast form.
Yes, and thank you to Luminous Finn on Tumblr for that suggestion. If you want to hit us up with some more suggestions, we are on Tumblr, howmanyfingerspodcast.tumblr.com.
I was about to say that's our first suggestion to come from the Tumblr way.
Yes,
we were a little late in the Tumblr.
Yeah.
I mean, we're actually even still trying to catch up. I'm sure it'll be caught up by the time we're
I'm sure Tumblr's going to love us because of how we feel about Deadpool and
yes. Yes.
other movies.
We're not Tumblr's favorite podcast.
Yet. You can also hit us up with suggestions on Instagram, How Many Fingers Podcast, Facebook, How Many Fingers Podcast, and Twitter at HMF Podcast.
And
or email. No one sent an email suggestion yet. howmanyfingerspodcast@gmail.com.
I feel like we haven't talked about our Gmail since like our first episode.
You can just talk to us. Just send us some pics.
Let us know, send us some real deep shit. Some real private, dark skeletons.
And then we'll talk about it on the podcast.
But this week we are drinking. I'm very excited. Mike walked in. I was like, "Look what I got!" And I believe it was during the Deadpool episode. Speaking of Tumblr,
that's right.
That we were drinking Rivertown's Hala Kahiki, which is a pretty delicious pineapple beer. We have returned to the Rivertown Brewery for Jaman.
It's all about the hops, man. It's their session IPA. Much like Hala Kahiki, it's got a colorful fish on the front.
Got a bass fish. He has dreadlocks, that like sort of slouchy beanie with
Rastafarian
colors all over the place.
He's just got a nice mug of Jaman Session IPA.
I think Mike saw this and was like, oh, like he didn't even see this, but he just saw like a picture of it, and he was like, we have to.
At some point, we've got to come back for the Jaman.
So I'm gonna. Oh no! That's never happened. Oh.
Rivertown, your beers are too carbonated. This is clearly not our fault for shaking them up.
Yeah. Oh boy.
We got computer damage. I think we're all right.
No, it just went all over my crotch. And,
got crotch damage.
Yeah, and all
Water
over
damage.
Well, I'll talk about that later. But it's pretty IPA-y.
IPA-y. IPA-y.
That's a pretty patented term by now. I've used that
IPA
every single time we have an IPA. That's a new adjective.
I think Rivertown is one of the few breweries that ever retweeted us when we tagged them. So
it might be the only. Yeah. I don't know though for sure.
Shout out to Rivertown. Maybe you can do it again. They
got hype on the Deadpool episode. They retweeted us. They liked us on Facebook. We're fans. We're fans now, and that's why I went and bought this. But Rivertown, it's really easy to sponsor us. All you have to do is just send us free beer.
Or, brew a beer in our honor. How Many Fingers Podcast the beer. You'd be fulfilling some dreams over here.
You would.
We'll send you some free koozies.
Yeah. Speaking of...
Yeah, you like that transition?
Yeah, I do like it. We are recording these in reverse today. We're doing a batch of 3.
Yeah.
Recording them in reverse, but this is the first episode that we're recording where we actually have the How Many Fingers Am I Holding Up? The podcast koozies in our hands.
Beers are staying cold.
Yeah.
The whole hour and a half of this episode.
It's very exciting. This is a pretty new development.
You're probably sick of hearing it by the time you're listening to this episode.
Yeah, but this is exciting for us.
Exciting for us,
right
yeah.
now, because
So if you haven't heard, the koozies are in. We've got 10 awesome colors. I don't know if I can list them off the top of my head. We got black, we got red, we got navy blue, we got forest green, mint green, placid blue, burgundy,
desert
eggplant,
rose,
desert rose,
desert rose,
every desert rose has its koozie, and camo, which you can't see.
Yes. I'm using the camo right now. I definitely was like, Mike, we got to get a camo, and I'm very, very pleased.
Camo looks sick. Oh, and eggplant. I don't know if I said eggplant. That's a pretty cool color.
Yeah.
So we got the colors. You can find those if you go to our website, howmanyfingerspodcast.com. At the top right of the page, there's a web store link you can click on. Or alternatively, you can just go to howmanyfingerspodcast.bigcartel.com. Same end result. And that's our web store where we're selling them for $5 each, shipping included. So you can't fucking beat that.
You cannot. It's free shipping. And another thing you're probably sick of hearing, but it's pretty new to us, is that we are having a contest where all you have to do is order a How Many Fingers koozie, get it in the mail. That's pretty easy once you order it.
Check your mail, leave your house, go to the mailbox.
And then put a nice cold beverage in it. Doesn't have to be a beer. We're okay with that. And take a selfie of yourself with that koozie, you know? And
make sure you have us liked on Facebook at
facebook.com/howmanyfingerspodcast
and tag us in that selfie.
Because we want to see them.
We want to see them, and that's how you officially enter the How Many Fingers koozie contest.
It is.
We're going to accept submissions until the 25th of August, and then we'll select winners at random from those submissions, and we'll announce those winners on September 1st on that episode.
Your name could
be on air. And we got some pretty cool prizes. We got the Deadpool Blu-ray. We got Spectre posters. We've got 10 Cloverfield Lane posters. We've got a sick booklet from The Hateful Eight. Lots of sick movie swag. So if you want some of that, get in it.
Get into it. Woo. So.
Jaman.
So the IMDb description for this film is: when a member of a popular New York City improv troupe gets a huge break. Sorry, it's not just a break. It's a huge break. The rest of the group, all best friends, start to realize that not everyone's going to make it after all. Are they all dying?
Well, we certainly were after the premiere of this movie.
Oh, boy. Yeah, and we haven't, we're X amount of minutes into this, and we haven't talked about how this is kind of a special episode.
Yeah.
About,
we've got a special guest on this episode.
We do!
Our first celebrity
guest, Mike Birbiglia.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks, guys. Fuck you, Joe.
I'm really honored to be here. I just want to say also, fuck you, Joe.
What are we, in 8th grade English class? Piece of shit.
Oh, God. It'll all make sense soon.
Yes, it will all make sense.
You may have heard us talk about it. What episode were we in? It was either Independence Day or...
the Finding Dory episode.
Finding Dory episode, that's right.
Because we went to this premiere Q&A event to go watch the film, which was accompanied by, like I said, a Q&A with not only the director, Mike Birbiglia, and who also wrote, produced, starred in, but also Gillian Jacobs.
And Chris Gethard.
And Chris Gethard was there.
So that was pretty cool. We got to sit pretty much, we were second row, but it was like in the middle of like the two like handicapped aisles.
Right.
So there was no seats in front of us. So we were essentially front row, center, like
people.
So even when like we weren't the ones asking questions, like they were pretty much just like staring right at us, which is pretty cool.
Right. Yeah. We went into the theater and I was like, we're probably going to get shitty seats. And everybody's filling up the back of the theater.
Yeah, like you would at like a normal movie, not one where the actors are going to be up front.
Right. And I hate sitting in the front row, but like there they were, the three like those directors' chairs sitting in front of the screen. I was like, Mike, that's where they're going to sit.
Yeah.
And so I literally we walked right over and just sat in the two seats I
was like waiting for someone to come over and be like, get up. Like,
yeah, no.
There's a reserved. There's a reason no one's sitting there.
Right, yeah. But no, I could literally, I think I took a picture of it. I could have fucking just like touched them with my feet. like if I wanted to. I didn't do it, but I could have if I wanted to.
They were very close.
So they did show the film. It wasn't all hoax. It was
a real film.
Hoax premiere. Wasn't a joke. Fooled you. Can't believe you guys all bought tickets to this.
Comedy.
You got joked. And so then again, after the film, it was a packed house. I think it was sold out. And they actually made a second premiere afterward in another theater. But what was I gonna say? Yeah, and it was kind of like you almost didn't believe that they were actually gonna come, like until they actually came. And it is, Mike Birbiglia, Mike and I feel like we have a history with him. When we were in college, he came to our college. And
he was actually the first stand-up comedian. Well, no, the one that opened up for him.
Right.
There was a show at our college. A kid from our college, I can't remember his name. He was from the comedy program, and he got on the bill, and he bombed. And like, not only bombed, but like was mad at the audience for him bombing, and was like... I can't remember exactly how he said it, but he was basically yelling at the audience, like, you don't fucking think I'm funny? Like, and had like a mental breakdown pretty much on stage, like to the point where like he walked off and Mike Birbiglia came on and had to be like, what the fuck was that guy's problem, right? Like, so this poor kid like not only bombs, but then has to hear Mike Birbiglia be an asshole to him in order to save the crowd for his show.
Right, yeah. I mean, he didn't really do I guess that's what happens when you don't really have a touring opener and you just have to rely on a college kid. But I feel like our college was kind of lame in the way that we would have guests and you would have to like pay full admission like to go in there. But this was like the first and only show that I knew of where I don't even know if we knew who Mike Birbiglia was exactly. Like we
knew he was a stand-up, but I hadn't heard any of his stand-up before that night.
But yeah, but he was cheap enough to where, us being college students were like, oh, sure, I'll pay
I think it was
a very small amount of money to go see him, and we loved him. I think he was really funny. I was laughing the entire time. I think he was promoting like the My Secret Public Journal. That was like a thing during that.
The show, or...
It was just like his stand-up at that time, I'm pretty sure. It was eventually released as an album, I think. I remember him talking somewhat about it. But anyway, so seeing him, I have actually seen Chris Gethard in person before. He was on like Jimmy Fallon or something when I was there.
Oh, really? He was one of the guests there? I didn't know.
Yeah, one time. It was like when we lived in like Bloomfield. Me and Sabri went. But it was very bizarre to have them sit like a foot in front of us, kind of, or it wasn't a foot, but it was a few feet.
Especially after watching them for on screen.
Oh no, yeah, watching them larger than life on the screen, and then also I think Jillian Jacobs made me want to like nervous vomit, like seeing her on Community for like X amount of years, and then seeing her. She
definitely seems like the bigger of the stars. Like, Community and then Love, so like two TV shows that I at least somewhat partially enjoyed.
And it was just kind of like, oh, I'm like,
she's right there. She's looking at me.
It was very surreal to sit right in front of them. But what I'm putting off really saying is that when I told Mike about this and I said, like, we have to go to this and yada, 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 I said, we have to, I explained it best in the Finding Dory episode, but I was like, we have to go and we have to ask a question. And I was like, I'll ask a question. Mike's like, all right, well, think about it. And I was like, okay. And then I told a bunch of other people and they were like, well, like really think about it before you do it. And I was like, okay. And then it's an hour before. This is how I handle all of the How Many Fingers notes. And I like I get there early and I go to a bar and I'm just like kind of drinking a beer and being like, what do I ask him? Like kind of thing. And I came up with a bunch of pretty good questions. And the guy who curates it just burns through my first few questions. And Mike Birbiglia compliments him and is like, wow, I've never heard that asked before. Like kind of on
I've done this for like 30 nights on this like tour and no one's asked this yet.
Right, yeah.
What a wonderful question.
And then eventually there was only about 5 or 6 questions.
Yeah.
So I'm glad I like jammed myself in there. But after the curator, it was some girl. Mike has like the best description of this girl. She was just
like, I mean, poor girl.
No, yeah, I feel for her, but yeah.
I mean, she was very timid, and she was just kind of like, my teacher said that if you like something, you shouldn't do it as a career because then you can't relieve stress that way, and it won't be as fun, and I don't know if I should take that advice about acting.
It reminds me of that YouTube
Question mark?
video. Have you ever wanted to so much
you ever
that you
sing
could...
so bad that you could die? But yeah, like just
It was a
question just like rife to like, I think maybe because he felt so bad he didn't like tear her to pieces, and he gave like an honest answer. All three of them pretty much did. Mm-hmm. And then Joe asked a question.
I came in there and...
Oh, and there was a few other questions that were like, you know, what do I do as a stand-up comedian? Like asking like career advice. Like no one really asked about the movie besides the guy curating the movie. And his was a good question. That's why it was one of the ones you had thought of.
It was the obvious one.
Everyone else was just kind of like taking advantage of the fact that these people were here.
Yes.
And weren't really taking advantage of the fact that you could ask them a question about the movie that you just saw.
It wasn't like they would be laughed out of like a film fest Q&A.
Yeah.
Like, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to ask... I was the only person besides the curator who asked... basically asked about like the film.
Yeah,
and
there
not
was
just
maybe
like,
one question
how
about
you
like
do, Mike Birbiglia?
how do I make people laugh?
But
there was like one question about like SNL.
Yes, and that
like,
was one of my questions. Yeah. But before we talk about my question, why don't we just have me ask it in person to our special guest?
He's standing right here, a foot length away.
Mike Birbiglia. So let's take a listen.
Listen in.
Oh, I was just curious if there was any sort of correlation between the title of the film and the Bob Dylan song. I heard there was that instrumental version at the end. I was just curious.
So that was a clue.
Okay.
The question is there a correlation between the film Don't Think Twice and the Bob Dylan song Don't Think Twice, It's All Right, especially since there was a piano version of it in the credits. I think you're on to something. Wait, I'm confused. Is this an 8th grade English class? Yeah, I mean, it was just this, I had this thought early on, which is like, I feel like Don't Think Twice All Right is like one of the great breakup songs of all time, and I had this thought like, that this film was kind of about the breakup of a friendship, and I thought, and one of the slogans of improv is "Don't Think." One of the mottos of it, and so I thought those two things meshed nicely.
Oh, thanks for that, Mike. All right, you can leave now, Mike.
It's painful. It's painful to re-listen to that. But
I enjoy hearing, now that I've like heard the clip enough times, like I'm starting to pick up on the nuances, and I enjoy just hearing your like nervous laughter, like basically laughing at yourself along with the audience.
It's like I wanted.
That's painful.
Yeah, no, and I'm recording it. It's right in front of me. I have the audio knowledge to know that anything that I say is going to be booming in that audio. I was like, don't say anything, just let him talk. But like immediately I was like, fake laugh. And it was kind of like, again, that was really one of the few questions actually about the film. And I was unaware that this wasn't the premiere of Don't Think Twice, but the Joe Lomas roast session of 2016, because
Comedy Central roast of Joseph Lomas.
It felt like a roast. It was just kind of like something that he's trying to kind of like squeeze into a joke. And I mean, he did like Joe Mano. He came in hot.
Yeah.
He was kind of just making fun of the theater, making fun of the lights in the theater. And then that girl asked a question. He kind of like gives her like a softball answer kind of thing. And then again, I'm sitting right in front of him, making eye contact with him. You can hear me halfway through kind of get some sort of hesitation because he starts to get this dumb fucking grin on his face, and I was just like, oh no. And
I mean, I don't know if it's because I don't know how many. I don't think we looked into how many premieres there were before this. I guess it's technically called a sneak peek that we saw.
we had one of the first premieres. I don't like they've
But
only
he was acting like they had done a bunch. Maybe he was just talking about press that he's done.
You're
for the
right.
movie.
Yeah, I
don't know if he did a whole.
because I think
lot,
they've
but-
been this premiered at South by Southwest. So
okay.
it's been going on. I mean, they did a shit ton of press at South by Southwest.
So I mean, part of me can understand it. Like that's kind of like a defense mechanism for stand-up comedians in
definitely,
general
right.
on stage. You know, like usually you're dealing with like hecklers and stuff, and
definitely.
the way to deal with someone like that is people are there to laugh, so you make fun of that person, and no one really gets their feelings hurt because they're at a comedy show.
Right,
But, like,
right, yeah.
We were at a Q&A for a movie, and we asked a question about
the
the movie,
director.
to the director of the movie about the movie. And I understand that the way that the question was asked is maybe that's what he ended up making fun of, like. But really, at the heart of that question, you're asking him, tell us a little bit about why the movie is named this. You're not specifically saying like it's not. It's you asked it in the form of a yes or no question, but it's not a yes or no question.
Right. What I mean, I asked is there any correlation, because I'm throwing him again a softball.
Yeah.
Like I'm not saying you named it this, and this is exactly like a Bob Dylan song. Why did you do that kind of thing? I'm not getting on the offense. I'm saying, oh, like, because what if he was like, there's a Bob Dylan song named "Don't Think Twice, It's All Right" kind of thing.
Yeah. Well,
But-
it's also like I think we talked about this, how it was also like maybe more too interviewee of a question than he's used to, for like, again,
Right.
especially considering the questions he got at the Q&A.
Right.
But it is like, if we had Mike Birbiglia on the podcast, like that's a decent question to ask someone. Like,
Right.
that's a good
Yeah.
interview question, because it's not giving them the answer. It's saying, here's a chance to expand on that. And that's what he does at the end of the clip, is talk about, and he gives a really good answer about like why he named the movie that, and what his connection, your question, maybe the fault was not saying, Don't Think Twice is not really something you would associate with stand-up comedy or improv comedy. Why do you name a movie about improv comedy about like a breakup song?
It literally almost wasn't like the fault was almost that the question wasn't like convicting enough. It wasn't like, why'd you do this kind of like thing.
Right.
And it was like I don't know. And like, I mean, I guess he thought that I was like really picking up on something that nobody else knew. But no, like, why'd you name your movie after a fucking Bob Dylan song?
Yeah,
Mike?
and the answer is good. And like, we've talked about this a lot. Like, I wish he would have just gone right to that. Like, instead of being like an asshole. Like, I was sitting right next to you. I feel nervous at Q&A, like things like, just to begin with. Like, I just think it's awkward, like people interacting with like celebrities, and especially they're always dumb questions. I think I said that to you before you like asked a question. I was like, just make sure you ask something good. Like, there's always dumb questions that people ask when they have the opportunity to like interact with like
It was,
someone
and you
famous.
were like, make it like short and sweet too,
Yeah.
which I think that was like a very like yada yada yada.
Maybe,
da, da,
should
da.
have made it so
ABC.
short and sweet. Maybe I fucked you over.
No, not at all. It was just
Birbiglia
kind
was
of like
looking for more there, apparently.
I mean, maybe I should have just been like, and like, I think if you funny, maybe you try to. but
What do I do about my career and stuff? Yeah. But Mike Birbiglia, you're an asshole.
thanks for being on the podcast. I don't take this
I don't-
personally.
yeah.
I think he's just a comedian, and I think you and I both look up to him, kind of like thing, especially after that stand-up that he did at William Patterson, because he's just a genuinely funny.
Oh, yeah.
I think he is very groundbreaking, just like Bo Burnham, sort of like, also like he can bring something into stand-up that isn't stand-up, kind of. So
Yeah, I mean, we say that jokingly. I don't think Mike
oh no,
Birbiglia is actually
not
an
at
asshole.
all. Yeah.
Again, like I would probably have horrible answers if we ever got into that fucking Q&A for less than 3.
Oh
in a
my
theater.
gosh. Yeah.
I'm not good at my feet at all, really. Like when someone's throwing me something I don't have a chance to prepare for, and that's really what a Q&A is like, oh, the public's gonna ask you questions about the movie they just saw or about their comedy careers.
And it again, he is a comedian. He came in hot. But yeah, I mean, let's talk about a little bit of background with Mike Birbiglia. Did you have notes or do I have notes?
I think you have notes.
Okay.
I hope you do.
No, I do. I do. So Mike Birbiglia has directed Sleepwalk with Me and 2 short films titled Fresh Air 2, Too Fresh, Too Furious, which I haven't watched, and What's Next for Jack Antonoff, who is Lena Dunham's boyfriend.
Fun, right? Or...
Yeah. So Mike Birbiglia is a stand-up comedian who has released 3 albums in the with Comedy Central Records: To Drink Mike, My Secret Public Journal Live, and Sleepwalk with Me Live. And Sleepwalk with Me really took off, from what I understand. The stand-up routine basically became an off-Broadway one-man show that became a book that was on the New York Times bestseller list that became a film. And the film premiered at Sundance Film Festival and went on to be screened at other film festivals, including South by Southwest.
Isn't there another stand-up special after that?
It's the one that like Pete Holmes always talks about, like Thank God for Jokes or something. Or is that what you're thinking of?
No, I think there's another one after one that I saw on Netflix. I'm gonna look it up now because that's the one that that's like my all-time favorite.
Is it My Boyfriend's Girlfriend?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
I don't know. These are just off of. I mean, these are comedy albums. That was like a Netflix thing.
Yeah, that was a Netflix
thing.
special,
Yeah.
I think. That's a really great
It is,
stand-up
yeah.
comedy special. That's like when you talk about like Mike Birbiglia figuring out how to like push the boundaries of like stand-up comedy in the way that like Bo Burnham kind of has.
Right.
Like that stand-up special is like just as funny and just as much stand-up as it is like spoken word.
Same.
Or
yeah.
like just like a one-man play essentially. And there's really weird points where like he'll be just making like these really funny jokes and then the jokes will kind of stop and he's just talking about something really serious. You know, like his girlfriend breaking up with him and you're like, oh, I'm not supposed to be laughing anymore. Now this is just like poetry and like a guy opening up his soul, which is a really cool blend. So check that out if you ever get the chance.
Did you see his first film though, Sleepwalk with Me?
No, I didn't get around to that yet.
It's like, and again, like I heard him on NPR. He's a big contributor to like This American Life. I think Ira Glass has produced both the films that he did, but I was so excited to watch it, and then it was finally on Netflix or something, and I kind of didn't like Sleepwalk with Me. Like, I love Mike Birbiglia's stand-up, and I loved, like, Sleepwalk with Me live, which was, I listened to, like, on Spotify or whatever, and it's great. Listen to it. It's essentially, like, either the stand-up or the one-man show recording, but I feel like something got lost in translation with like this was such a successful stand-up that it went through so many mediums and it kind of did this kind of like whisper down the lane thing, and by the time it got to a film it was just like, I don't know, it lost something.
It was a stand-up special first and then he made it into a movie about a comedian and he was just using the jokes? Or
I think it was a like don't quote me on this, but it was like stand-up special, one-man show, book, movie.
Oh
yeah, wow. It was like a really long thing. So he used a lot it was pretty much verbatim, like the one-man show, but it just didn't translate well into a movie, I think. I mean, not verbatim.
Yeah.
Because you can't do a one-man show verbatim. I don't know. But I was really hoping for a kind of like Mark Birbiglia's on the road, and you know, and he always talks about that in his stand-up, like just doing shitty shows and stuff. But yeah, I don't know. It just didn't connect with me, which I think this one connected a lot more with me. I was kind of going into it. I think we both saw the trailer, and we're just like, here we go. It just kind of is like, okay. And this was coming off of Sleepwalk with Me. But I think it was actually good, and we'll get into it. But starring in it was Keegan-Michael Key, Jillian Jacobs, Mike Birbiglia, Chris Gethard, Kate Micucci, Tammy Sager, and then also there were cameo appearances by Lena Dunham, Ben Stiller, and Pete Holmes.
Yeah, that was good.
Who isn't even on the IMDb page, but there is a point where I said, Mike, the sign-in sheet, that's Pete Holmes' signature.
It said Pete Holmes on
Yeah,
there?
it said where she was
you
signing.
can kind of hear him behind the door at one point.
No, yeah,
and you said that's Pete Holmes' voice, and then he comes around the corner and you see Pete Holmes. And I was like, oh, great.
Because it went from like he's the Keegan-Michael Key is basically auditioning for SNL, and he's signing, and I go like, Mike, there's Pete Holmes. And it's just his signature, and then he's waiting in the waiting room in the next scene. I'm like, Mike, that's Pete Holmes' voice. And then in the next scene, it's literally like Pete Holmes walking out. And I was like... So, I mean, from listening to You Made It Weird, I imagine that they're friends. And
oh, yeah. Well, I was literally
Birbiglia.
listening to You Made It Weird on the way down there, and he was mentioning Mike Birbiglia like 3 or 4 times in the
I'm
podcast.
surprised he hasn't mentioned this movie. I haven't heard...
Yeah, I don't know if he just didn't want to toot his own horn or...
Or maybe it was so long ago that, like, I just don't, you know,
Yeah, that's
like...
true.
But, yeah.
So, yeah,
We can really get into the movie now.
Yeah, the 6... It's 6, right?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, the 6 of them, they're in this improv comedy group called The Commune. They run a weekly improv show at the American Improv Theater. So, like, the intro to the movie is kind of just us getting used to their warm-up routine. It's a lot of them just kind of, like, using anything that's said as something to, like, riff off of. Or just, like, mumbling and, like, repeating anything that anyone says in, like, a funnier voice. Like
5 minutes, guys.
Yeah.
5 minutes, guys. Which is great.
They talk about that later when they're doing like I thought that was a nice addition to the film is that Mike Birbiglia's character is a improv comedy teacher.
Yes, yeah.
And they kind of use that as another like vehicle to like introduce you to the world of like improv comedy. So they talk about
definitely.
like concepts that you might not be familiar with if you don't, like I wasn't, if you're not totally into like improv comedy. And they talk about like the hive mind, and that's kind of what that is like trying to get everybody like on, even if they're not saying something funny in that moment, to just get everybody like on the same like wavelength of just, you know, repeating the same words over and over again. So that's kind of cool. They're like their warm up routine, and then they're all patting each other on the back and saying, got your back, got your back, got your back.
And there is like an occasional, there is an occasional Britta, Gillian Jacobs. I'm just going to call her Britta.
Britta, yes.
Occasionally she'll have like a voiceover part that's kind of like explaining the history of, and they even showed like kind of like, you know, from the vault, you know, like black and white like video of like, oh, this is the first improv troupe kind of. And
yeah, I
everything.
wasn't crazy about that in the beginning of the film.
Because you don't really, because eventually she becomes a teacher at the end. And like that's what that's drawing from. So it is a little
It was a little late of a payoff.
Stretchy, yeah.
But I just, we've talked about this before, I hate when movies open with narration and then don't really come back to the narration, or don't use the narration consistently throughout. Like, it ends up just being like a kind of like a crutch to like open up a movie without like doing exposition like the real way.
Yeah, no, it is. And, you know, I don't have any suggestions for how we could have done it better, but I know that it is a crutch. So there is that. And essentially, they are the commune. Did you say that yet?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And, essentially they are this improv troupe that performs at
American Improv Theater.
Yeah, American Improv Theater. They seem all very well and good. You all pretty comfortable where they are.
Yeah.
But you also get this kind of like, oh, somebody that used to be in this troupe, or at least somebody who used to perform with Mike Birbiglia's character, is now on the Saturday Night Live equivalent, which they call Weekend Live. And so it almost does present them as like, yeah, this is fun, but there's something more to be
that we would wanna
desired.
do,
Yeah.
Although it seems like they've got a somewhat successful following at the place that they're at.
Definitely.
Although they do make note of, because pretty much, is it right before the first show or is it after?
What?
When they find out, because that's basically one of the thrusts of the movie, is that the theater is being closed.
I think after,
They're turning it into a Trump building. And I guess part of the reason is because like it's a popular show weekly, but like they charge so little for admission, like they're like $3 admission or something like that, and
Right.
so there's just not enough to keep the building open. So we find out that they've only got a few weeks of shows left. So that also puts like a further thing, like, you know, they're starting to
ultimatum,
doubt,
yeah.
like, you know, do I want to do improv comedy forever? And it's also kind of like trying to get off of this like sinking ship in some way. And
it is. It presents literally an ultimatum for every, you know, this is this is a tricky film because you have 6 main characters, even though it's not exactly 6 main characters.
Right. That was something I remember. That was something that we talked about when we first saw the trailer. Like, oh, it just seems like it's going to be one of those movies where they struggle to keep up with this many main characters.
Right, but it definitely presents some sort of ultimatum for all of them to essentially get their lives together, because like this is all they have. Where do they go from here, kind of thing. And if we want to talk about each character specifically a little bit to advance ourselves a little bit in the plot, the Mike Birbiglia character, I really liked him. He was definitely one of the most developed characters. He had the longest history. He's definitely significantly older than a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
Again, he's also a teacher. He's sleeping with some of his
students.
his improv students it's not even like a university. It's just kind of like a improv class that people take.
He's always talking about how he was like inches away from getting weekend live. He says
that's like a quote that like the group is familiar with, like inches away.
And then you've got Jack, played by Keegan-Michael Key, and he's clearly like the more talented comedian in the group, although probably maybe not the best improv comedian.
Right.
It seems like. And I think he and Miles are definitely the most defined characters in there. Like, I actually really liked Keegan-Michael Key's performance as Jack.
Yes, because
I was worried how he would play in like a sort of like indie film, just because I like him, but he's like kind of like, and I guess it kind of fits his character being like a more like over the top comedian, like the stuff he does with like Key and Peele. Mm-hmm. Like it's almost like a more like Chappelle Show kind of humor as opposed to like the more subtleness that you would expect from like an indie comedy.
But he can be subtle. He can be muted. He can have like real.
And he's actually a decent dramatic actor
in
like the few dramatic scenes he has in this. I think just even beyond being like the more talented comedian, he's just one of the most talented actors like in this group.
Oh, definitely
by far.
Yeah.
One thing that I thought is that the improv shows that they have, I think he somewhat hinted to this, because they were talking about how Britta Gillian Jacobs essentially had to learn how to do improv comedy for the movie.
Right.
And I think that was him sort of hinting that like some of these shows were like actual improv that they were doing. Like I don't think a lot of this was scripted.
Right.
I don't know entirely how that would work in terms of, I'm sure they would improv some of this out and they'd be like, okay, that works. Let's do that again and get a better take of that or something like that. But I feel like the improv shows were really not that funny. But like the audience would like laugh like it was a fucking like riot like every time like any of these jokes were told. I don't know if I just don't get improv comedy or if that was just a product of them having a live audience for these filmings. And
I feel
because
like
we had a similar thing watching this movie where I was
literally
like,
about to say
I liked the movie, but I didn't think it was that funny overall. There was definitely not a lot of like laugh out loud moments, but every time there was a joke, the entire theater would like absolutely erupt with laughter. And it was like they were prepared to be at like a stand-up show, like where you're there to laugh, you're like waiting to laugh. And I also felt like it was like they knew Mike Birbiglia was like in the other room, like maybe like hearing their reaction, and they wanted to be like, "Haha, we're laughing at your movie."
I think it's also, I think the film and those scenes of the improv were sort of a microcosm of what we were in. Or not even a microcosm, just like a replica of what we were in. I think what I can imagine is that, they were at some sort of improv, place where they can, do improv or whatever. Mm-hmm. Really stumbling over my words here. But
what is this, an 8th grade English class, Jim?
It's going to haunt me in my dreams. Don't meet your heroes. But basically, I can imagine them being at an improv group, like at an improv performing center or whatever, in front of an audience of improv kids. Yeah. So, of course, they're going to be like...
super hard.
Yeah, they're going to improv
and
laughing.
It's also, I'd imagine it's probably hard to, like, teach an audience, like, oh, like, a more stifled laughter here. They're funny, but they're not, like, Weekend Live funny, so don't laugh like it's, like, the funniest thing you've ever heard. Like, really the only direction you give is laugh. So everyone thinks they have to laugh, like, loud enough to be heard, rather than just kind of reacting, like, naturally, like you would to an improv show.
But I also like to think that maybe it is, like, a kind of, like, like, just off the top of my head, like we were just talking about like Pete Holmes or whatever, and like we listen to that podcast every week, and it's like, what brings you back? What brings these people to this theater every week? Unless they like actually find these people funny. And again, maybe they don't have to laugh out loud at every single joke, but it was believable. But I think also the theater that we were in, I think maybe this event was primarily sort of advertised to improv people, comedy students.
Sure, yeah.
I'm sure from every...
That's why some of the questions were about
university.
Like, there's certain like I think Mike Birbiglia is one of the type of comedians that like comedians are really into. Like there's certain people that like everyone will get into. But I think certain ones like Pete Holmes and Mike Birbiglia and some of the more like comedy favorites are like, they're big in the comedy community, maybe not as huge like outside of it.
Right.
Haven't broken through that mold yet. But yeah, I did wonder if, you know, maybe I just don't get improv comedy because I've never really gone to an improv show. So I'm not sure if they're funnier than this normally.
I don't know.
Like, I couldn't tell if the audience was laughing or was supposed to be laughing at more like the magic of it, of, you know, oh, how did he come up with that, like right there? Or if it's supposed to be like when you watch an improv show, are you supposed to more laugh at, you know, is it just funny or is it not funny? You know,
I've never been in a theater that has laughed as much as that, though. You know, like it was
actual theater or the theater in the movie.
The theater that you and I were sitting in.
Yeah.
It was definitely I just realized this. You could definitely chalk it up to. There's 3 like real like actors who are about to
maybe
walk in.
Maybe if they hear me laugh hard enough, I'll get my big break.
Not even that. It's just kind of, not even that. I think it's just a combination of anxiety and excitement of, my God, this is funny. But after this, they're actually gonna be here, like, you know, like kind of thing. And it's, I know that's why I laughed a lot too. And this movie is actually funny. I laughed thoroughly during this film. There's a lot of like really standout lines, and I think there's a lot of different types of humor. The like the 5 minutes, guys, 5 minutes, guys, like kind of thing. And then I'm just gonna skip ahead in the plot, but when Chris Gethard's character's dad is sick and he's in the hospital, and he's had some sort of a stroke, and he can't really talk, but at the end, he's like, all right, Dad, like, I'll be right back. Or he's like, I'll be back soon, like, when I can. He lives in New York City, and they don't really have a car or whatever, so they all had to rent one and drive there. And, you know, his whole improv troupe is there, you know, kind of supporting him, which I really liked and admired, like, that kind of detail. It wasn't just like, oh, this is his side story. Like, everybody's there, kind of like, thoughts and prayers with him. But then he goes, thank you. And then on the car ride home, they all start going like, thank you. Which is like a really dark but like funny and
but it was
realistic.
cool because I felt like that showed like because in a movie like this, even though there's 6 main characters, the improv group itself is kind of like its own character, and that shows like their style of humor a lot is like,
oh, definitely,
just that really like dark humor, the way that they are always looking for ways to like play off of each other and just be inappropriate. Yeah, I thought that scene stood out a lot.
But then there's quite a few different plot points. There's Chris Gethard's dad is in the hospital. He's had a stroke. There is Mike Birbiglia's character has a girl from high school who's visiting the city on some sort of business trip, and it's kind of the awkwardness of like, oh, you never got a real career kind of thing, like to him, and him kind of also being charismatic enough to sort of woo her. And again, I think they were both in drama together, and it kind of shows that he never really grew out of it. And then there is the Jillian Jacobs and keegan-michael Key, which I think is the most unique relationship between them, is that they're dating and that they're also in this improv group. And I fucking love shit like this. And I think that's like why I like Less Than 3. It's when you're both like in that same art place and you're trying to manage like these emotional feelings.
When you're shitting where you eat.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's just like a Starbucks. That's not even
Starbucks
a text.
is outside.
then Starbucks like, try Tivana! I'm like, oh god, why is that volume all the way up?
Because we listened to the clip.
Yeah, no, that is true. But there's like that sort of, there's a lot of those good like improv and life metaphors where like Keegan-Michael Key says to Britta, like, you can't do improv forever, it just ends. And that's like such like a, gives me like, that line gave me like chills in both like the trailer and in the movie.
That's really well delivered by him, that whole scene.
No, definitely.
And he actually ends up having more dramatic scenes than funny scenes in this movie, I feel like, just with the whole relationship with Britta. And then there's the whole storyline where he and Britta both get called for auditions for Weekend Live.
Right.
And they're like, you know...
They're the only two in the improv
only
group.
two, yeah. So they're
because
like
somebody came to see the improv group from Weekend Live, and they're the only two that get the call out of the whole group.
And like they're kind of like practicing with each other and writing with each other leading up to like the audition. And then I guess they're saying that, like, you know, her audition is like 15 minutes after his. So he's like, oh, I'm going to leave now. And she's like, well, I don't want to be like waiting around. Like, you go on without me. Like, I'll meet you there. And he goes to his audition. And I really like the detail of her just not going to the audition and like being too intimidated to go and not really like reaching for that success. And I think that is just an awesome, or an interesting rather, dynamic in that relationship, to have like two people who are working together who they feel like they have the same goals. And I think that's kind of like a splitting point for them, sort of in that relationship of like her realizing like, I don't really want like, you know, the fame and the glory, and I kind of just want to like be like in improv comedy and like in the moment and like enjoy this shit.
And there is some weird sort of, I don't know if I liked it or didn't like it, exposition about her character and her, Keegan-Michael Key, are talking, and she moved to the city when she was 16. She wanted to be a ballerina. She was very talented, and then kind of gave up on that altogether and found their improv troupe. And she says, the best night of my life is when you guys accepted me into that troupe. And Key is also like, yes, that's the best night of my life too. And it kind of shows that she's like this character who can't commit or doesn't want to be that kind of like in the spotlight person, even though she's sort of almost the narrator or the MC when they are on stage, and she's like, who here has had a bad day, kind of, and she stands in front of everybody and asks them. And then it's ironic because Mike Birbiglia's character has slept with too many of his students, and it's getting kind of messy, and he says like, you know, like, Britta, I need you to step in for me. And she goes to teach, and ironically, she can't. She has like kind of a public speaking kind of. She's a little shaky about it when she's by herself. Like, she can do it by herself, but there have to be people behind her. She has to be a part of a group. But yeah, and that's a kind of thing for growth too. There's not a lot with the Tammy Sager character, who is not really even that big of an actor. I feel like she's done a lot of writing work. I don't remember exactly what for now that I'm thinking about it. Her character's pretty undeveloped. It's just the other characters are kind of aggressively mean to her about how she lives with her parents.
How she's privileged.
Yeah, she's not really struggling. She lives with her parents.
Oh, I thought she lived on her own, but she just had a nice place paid for by the parents.
No, it'd be, like, her mom will be like, your bedroom smells like weed or something. Like, she'll get that a lot kind of thing. Right. Yeah, and that she smokes weed. Those are like her two characteristics. And
well, I guess she's supposed to be someone that hasn't really like applied herself, and then there's this whole thing to jump a little bit more forward in the plot where Jack does end up getting the part at Weekend Live, and
Britta doesn't.
And
because she didn't fucking try out.
Also, to go a little bit, I do love the scene where Jack tells everybody that he got the job at Weekend Live, because like it's no one knows like whether to be happy for them or to be like in their own feelings. Like, he tells them, and it's just like complete silence, and you can see like in everyone's like face, like they're not thinking like, oh, this is great for Jack. Their first thought is like, oh, like someone else that I know got like the job that I want, and
in my improv troupe, right?
Yeah, they're all just thinking what it means for them, and then eventually they're like, oh, yeah, that's so great, like thank you, like, you know, that's awesome. But I did love that scene, and then following that, they're all basically trying to like, you know, Jack, like, can you talk to, I forget what they have like a Lorne Michaels name that's supposed to be, the equivalent of Lorne Michaels at Weekend Live. And they're like, could you talk to him, maybe get me an audition? Could I submit like a writing packet? And they're all end up working on like writing packets. And then when it comes down to it, Tammy Sager's character, Lindsay, is the one that ends up getting hired as a writer. And everyone's like, the most like fucked up things. Like, we didn't even know you were like working on this. Like, we talked to you about like our writing packets, and you never once said that you were like working on it. But it is like a nice story arc, because it's like, we just get a little bit of her character that, she's not someone that's really applying herself. And then she takes the initiative, applies herself, and succeeds, like, but everyone hates her for it.
Exactly.
It's like the thing that they were ripping on her before, you don't apply yourself, you just live at home, you don't even have a job right now, and you don't need a job. But then she goes out and gets the job that they all want, and they're all like, well, you fucking bitch. Like,
no, and it is, and I think it's a very accurate sort of like telling of what it is to be like, in this sort of industry that like there's only so much space, and it is.
And even during the Q&A, someone asked a question similar to that, and Mike Birbiglia was like, I think I'm going to let Chris Gethard handle this one.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how like he had gotten passed over for his friends for like 11 or 12 jobs that he like specifically wanted that his like friends got. So he was saying he really related to this film on that level.
It is, and I think that is what makes it one of the most realist films that I've seen ever, really, about like the sort of entertainment industry, really. I think no,
go on.
No, you can go.
I think one of the weakest developed characters is Allison, the is it Kate Micucci character, who
she is very underdeveloped.
We kind of learn that she is an artist, and like some of her like comedy has to do with like art. Like, she's trying to do a writing packet with Bill, the Chris Gethard character, for Weekend Live to submit, and like her jokes have to do with like drawings and stuff like that, and she's really more of like an artist than a comedian. And she's been working on this book about a sculptor who was the best in her town, and the town raised money for her to go to art school, but then she just never sculpted again after that.
Right.
Which I did like that book, and I'm okay with her character being in the movie just for the insertion of that little detail from the book. Yeah. Because that's a big theme in this movie, in terms of like, especially with the British character Sam, like, where she's got like this talent, like talented enough to like get an audition at SNL Weekend Live, that no one else in this improv group can get. People who have been doing improv for like way longer than her, and she just doesn't go. Like, being presented with like the opportunity to find success and literally standing like in your own way. And it also sort of represents Allison too, because I think she keeps saying that she hasn't finished the book, and she like won't finish the book, and that's something they sort of rip on her on. And
that's something that I think, again, our expectation of going into this, and it's like, oh my god, there's so many characters, and then coming out and being like, all right, well, yeah, again, this was just so this character could have this, and it's an improv troupe. It can't just be like two or three people. It has to be 6 people, really, because that's traditionally what it is. And it brings that group, like this almost sort of weird family mentality into it. And even if characters like her or the Tammy Sager character, they have this, they bring something to the film, and I didn't feel like they needed to be completely fleshed out. Yeah. Somebody said something to me, some other guy who I work with, who was also at the thing, said something like, ironically, like, like the Keegan-Michael Key character is, again, like when the Weekend Live scout comes into their improv group, and the first reaction to them, which is one of my favorite lines, is Mike Birbiglia turns to me, he's like, don't be a fucking showboat. Like, and that's like such a real, like, they're like able to be very honest with each other. And he's like, what are you talking about? He's like, no, everybody here knows.
And then he does it being a showboat, because during that improv show, he ends up going into like a Barack Obama impersonation, which is like so incredibly, obviously,
that's what they need.
True to what SNL wants, is like political impersonators. And I did also like the scene where they're just watching SNL and like they're just like kind of like making like observations on it, which it's kind of like just like echoing like thoughts that we've had about SNL.
Yeah.
Watching it, like about how nobody really watches like the musical guest, like, and like how everyone's just kind of sitting there like incredibly bored during like the musical guest.
Right.
But then in like the theater where they're filming it, like everyone's just like jumping up and down, like, yeah, this is awesome. And then it cuts to them at home and they're all just sitting there watching, like, okay, like.
I do, yeah. I have that as a note that like ELEL song 40 Watt, which I have to look up. I don't actually know what that is.
Damn, Joe.
Or more specifically, the chorus of that song, because if you listen to that song, it's not that great. But it was both perfect for the trailer. The trailer does kind of touch you in a way that's kind of like, this might be good.
Oh.
Even though I had that forethought of like, Sleepwalk With Me wasn't that good. Definitely look it up. It's very upbeat, very catchy, just so you can understand what I'm talking about. But in the film, everyone is, again, gathered in this small, shitty apartment and to watch like Keegan-Michael Key's first, like, oh my God, it's his first show on Weekend Live. And they draw this sort of contrast again, like you just said, like where Keegan is standing next to like Lena Dunham, who's like the guest for like that show, and they're like, whoa, like they're in awe of like this live band performing with like the energy of the show and everything. Like I'm sure he's like radiating with like, oh my God, I was just on like live TV, and he's like fucking amped. And then it contrasts that with like the rest of the improv troupe, you know, cramped onto like this one like 3-person couch. And there's like just pizza crust and just weed and like
the TV is like really small, like noticeably small on screen. I also love how when they're watching like his scenes, like it's their friend from the improv group, but they're like critiquing him. They're like, you know, it's funny. It's not like laugh out loud funny. What else? I did, to move sort of towards the end. I think we're getting closer to wrapping this up. I did really like the way that everything kind of ended up in the end.
Definitely.
Especially in terms of just the individual character arcs. So we already kind of talked about this, but like, yeah, you don't need to fully flesh those characters out, but they did such a nice job of just like, you know, planting, you know, character traits and wants and needs and then satisfying them in the end. And that's something that a lot of movies fail to do. I harp on this on every movie review in this podcast, where story just is, you know, characters having wants and needs, and you either give it to them or you don't at the end of the movie, and that's what creates conflict or resolution. And they do that really well for just like the small characters, in terms of like, it's completely understood, you know, that Lindsay is someone that doesn't apply herself, and the movie ends with her applying herself and finding success. And, you know, Allison is someone that hasn't been able to really finish her book, and she works on her book. And Sam, you know, realizes that she doesn't really want to be on Weekend Live. She skips her audition, and she kind of falls into teaching, but actually ends up really enjoying the teaching sort of substitution that she's doing. I really love the scene where she goes out drinking with her students from the class, and then they end up like going back to someone's house and just like hanging out and like kind of like riffing like the whole night on like comedy and whatnot. And like you can just see that she's like truly happy there in a way that she wasn't really with like the improv group. And,
because
like,
it's a younger version of themselves.
Yeah.
Essentially, yeah.
And I think she likes speaking like that leadership role, and kind of just like she'd rather raise like the next generation of comedians than
Definitely,
you know, find that success for herself in a way. And then also related to that note, I thought it was a little cheesy, but in the end I kind of loved it. There's the improv scene at the end where they're at the, actually I don't know if they're at the old theater, but it's when it's been kind of torn down to get ready to be sold. It's like bare bones, and they have this thing throughout the movie where you know, there's like 6 chairs in the beginning set up for all the improv comedians that are going to be there. And, you know, throughout the movie, certain people just can't come for whatever reason. And they'll show before every show someone removing a chair.
Right, for like the Chris Gethard character when his dad was like, in an accident.
And then for this scene, everyone just can't make it. And there's literally just one chair, and it's just Britta doing a solo improv show. And someone says that she would always open up all these shows with like, you know, has someone had a particularly bad day? And like nobody says anything, and then some guy is like, you have, and she's like, yeah, I have had a bad day. And she kind of starts like improving like about, you know, what's going on in her life, and she comes with like this metaphor for like being stuck in the well, and she kind of starts going off on like, I'm okay being stuck in the well, talking about how like her boyfriend,
Right, it's like a Lassie kind of
was maybe trying to like pull her out of the well with like Weekend Live, and he ends up actually showing up at the show and hops in to do the improv scene, and they're like improving, but it's more like they're really just talking to each other, and it's like it's kind of cheesy, like because it's something where we can kind of see the writer's fingerprints, like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to have this scene where they're improving but they're actually talking to each other. But I still kind of loved it, and it was neat in a kind of way. It was a little too neat, but it was also just nice, and it was like it's not the type of movie where I needed some like highbrow like ending that completely hit all the fingerprints and tracks. It was just a nice resolution for those characters, and really just a cool scene, and I liked everything about it. So I thought that was cool. I guess that wasn't the very last scene, was it? Or
it wasn't the very last scene because there is a sort of afterword. And it is them going to Chris
Bill's.
Gethard's dad's funeral, and it is nice to see that they really hit a rough patch. It's like at one point there is a sort of like there's really this escalating scene where they're like, all right, we're going to go down, because essentially Michael Keegan-Key uses an improv scene and puts it into a sketch and Weekend Live. And Mike Birbiglia says, you know what, we're going to go, who's kind of just his jealousy has reached an all-time high. It says, like, we're going to go down there, we're going to wreck that after party, like, kind of thing. And he ends up going down there and, like, hitting him, for which he immediately apologizes, which is kind of funny. Funny, and then
he's like, literally like, "Oh, sorry, are you okay?"
And then, to which, and then that is also when the Tammy Sager says, "Guys, I don't want to go in there and embarrass myself in front of my employees and my co-eds or employees or whatever the fuck." And they're like, "What are you talking about?" She's like, "I was hired as a writer," know, and that's when a lot of stuff comes out, and then it literally kind of fast forwards to this afterword of Mike Birbiglia has kind of made his peace with leaving the comedy world behind, and he's raising this, child who isn't his with that girl who's visiting from high school, and Chris Gethard has gotten this property that his father
his dad,
bought. Yeah,
he had mentioned in like one of the very first scenes. His dad mentioned that he had bought like an adult video store or adult theater or something like that. Then obviously his dad dies, so it's left to him after the funeral, and he's free to turn it into a new improv space for them.
Right, which is funny too, because the dad, before he gets into an accident, is sort of really pushing him to be. He's like, I got this new space, we could sell this to like H&M or something, but instead, when they're visiting his dad's place and they're all kind of swimming in like his childhood pool, he's like, I saw my dad bought like tickets to my high school's like rendition of like Peter Pan. And he's like, and it's kind of this validation of like his dad still does care about that world, and he does take it seriously, even though he's like, are you still selling hummus? And he's like, no, Dad. And then the next scene is like him sampling hummus in like a Trader Joe's. But yeah, do you want to get into some fingers?
Yeah.
Feel free to.
No, the only other like observation I had in that scene, the kind of like epilogue for the movie, is that I really liked Jack in that scene, just because like his story arc is kind of weird, because it could have kind of just ended with, he got Weekend Live, and everyone in the film kind of hates him for it, and there wasn't really without what they did, there wasn't really an opportunity to like kind of endear him more to us, because he was kind of just villainized through everyone else's eyes.
Right.
And obviously it would be a horrible life decision for him to be like, oh, I'm going to leave Weekend Live, like, and come back to improv comedy, which would have been
right. Yeah.
In terms of story arc, that's nice, but it just doesn't make sense. That's not something that anyone would do.
It's not happens in life. Yeah.
So they kind of get around that in a nice way, where like he's, they keep talking at the funeral about how he's got to catch this train to get back to, it's the last train to get back, before he starts his next week of work at Weekend Live. And he just has this kind of like quiet moment where like he's got his bag, and he says something to the effect of like, I don't really want to go. And they're all kind of like, no, like you got to go. Like, And it's just like a nice like gesture of him kind of being, you know, showing that he still appreciates the group. Like he still wants to stay with them.
Right.
But they're also in the end able to accept like, no, like you've got like a good thing going in your life. Like they're all kind of in peace with that at the end. So I thought that was a nice way to kind of wrap up what could have been like a weird like writing trap where
Definitely.
if they hadn't had that scene, it would have just been like, oh, well, he found success and he's too good for the improv comedy group now. So it was a nice little just throw of a bone to make his character seem more endearing to us. But yes, we can get into some fangers.
Okay.
I gotta think of what I would give this film.
All right, well then I'll go first. 'Cause I didn't know what I was going to give this film for a long time too. But I eventually came to a decision. Just things that I didn't talk about yet. There's like that sort of, you know, there's a line that I really liked, and I think it's even in the trailer too. It says, that's the great paradox about Weekend Live. Was it ever good? Which felt like, again, like a stand-up that didn't really fit into Mike Birbiglia's stand-up. And it's kind of like, and again, when I watched the trailer, it sort of felt like an observation about Saturday Night Live that was sort of like shoehorned into the trailer. But I still liked it. It definitely made fun of the whole Saturday Night Live stigma, and it's something that somebody would say if they were sort of jealous that one of their friends got into it. It's something that I can definitely identify with, because it is this sort of stigma where everyone romanticizes the like sort of like, you know, John Belushi like era, or like the or in this case, like, you know, whatever characters or whatever actors you grew up with being on Saturday Night Live. Like, oh, it'll never be as good as that, you know? And it's this kind of like mythology where it's like, was it ever good? Like kind of thing. Or is it good now? And and that's what his character does ask. It says, was it ever funny? And I don't know. It's something, there was definitely some... what I was trying to say before was that, again, with the character balance, my friend from work was like, you know, like the key character, you know, it's kind of like ironic that he is kind of like the showboat of the group, but like that character actually gets most of the attention of the movie. But again, I feel like the whole weights and balance and everything of the characters and how developed or underdeveloped they are, I felt like his character had to be appropriately developed for that. Overall, though, I don't have like a whole lot to say about this film. I really liked it. And again, I might tally that up to like an incredible theater experience, the best theater experience I've ever really had. Like it's like we
were so close that Mike Birbiglia made fun of us.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy to think that like you can watch a movie and that, you know, everybody on, you know, the screen who are just recognizable characters, recognizable people, will come out and like talk to you about the film afterwards. I said, like, we weren't sure whether we're going to review this movie or not too at some point, and I said, like, we have so much information that is not just us reading off an IMDb page or a Wikipedia page anymore. Like, Mike Birbiglia was there, and like there are those details like that you don't see anywhere else on print online. That's like they went and did improv shows together to like get into like the grind of like what they actually were doing. And, you know, Jillian Jacobs never did improv. She was the only one in the group who never did improv, and all these really like tasty tidbits of like information that you'd love to get from the Q&A. But yeah, still love Mike Birbiglia, even though he roasted me in front of my friend in a fucking audience of people, in a colleague at work.
Oh, that's right, you did run into someone.
Yeah. But I think this is even better than Hello, My Name is Doris, which I gave a 4. I think it's easy to fit into that genre, but I expect more from Mike Birbiglia, kind of, you know? And he is such a genius when it comes to stand-up, or a genius for most of his stand-up routines, and just a super admirable guy. He is the comic, like you said. So I think I'm just going to give this 4 fingers, which is still a pretty much rave review from me. I would say this comes out, again, we saw this months before it actually came out. It
Comes
still
out
hasn't
July
come.
22nd, I believe.
Yeah, it comes out July 22nd. This is a movie I would go and see. I would put my stamp of, like, go see this. So 4 fingers from me.
Joe's seal of approval. Yeah, I think if we had reviewed this, because we were planning to review this on another night, on another batch, where
We were. We
took
saw this
too
like
long
a month or two ago.
We took
Yeah.
too long with the episodes, and we were just like, yeah, well, I can't do this tonight. I'm too tired.
Right.
I think if we had reviewed it then, I might have given it a much lower score. I think it's the type of movie that I needed some time to like let it, sit with me and settle in. And I think some of the genius of some of the lines and the way they kind of expertly handle a lot of the different storylines and having 6 characters, and they really do a nice job of planning characteristics and having them pay off with resolution for each character, at least somewhat, even just in the tiniest subtle ways. Like, it's not like the ending is some big, like, we all made it and we're all successful at the end. Like,
exactly.
they all kind of find their own peace in like a little way. And it's maybe a little bit too happy at the end, but I still really liked it. And similar to that, like, improv scene, it was, a little cheesy, but it kind of just felt like it worked for the film, and it was really nice. I think a lot of the performances were decent, especially like Keegan-Michael Key as Jack. I think Mike Birbiglia is still a fantastic actor, and I think he shows to himself to be pretty seasoned, and obviously Britta as well. I think some of the other ones probably leave some stuff to be lacked. I think it's interesting that Britta was the only one that hadn't done improv comedy.
Yeah.
Because I thought her improv comedy felt the
Was
most
yeah.
natural, or at least was the funniest out of like everyone there. I don't know. I also like the fact that, being a fan of SNL myself, I felt like I related really hard to the way that I'm a fan of SNL, but I still don't think it's that funny. Like, it's more like you're just a fan of like the medium and of the mystique and the mythology of SNL. And I think even during the Q&A, some more, insider information that we got, someone had asked him a question about, did it feel weird for you to be in the industry and to kind of like be bashing Weekend Live in a way this? And he kind of went off and said that, I don't really feel like I'm bashing SNL or Weekend Live as much as it's just like a love letter to Weekend Live. Like, someone who didn't like SNL wouldn't know these things about SNL that we were able to insert. And there is a lot of like, knowing details in there in terms of, the way that people perceive like the music portions and, the audition process and just the way it all works out. So I think I appreciated that.
And I feel like that's what people, I don't know, this is a random note, but that's like what people love. Like when they love on like podcasts like Mark Maron or, what were we talking about before? Pete Holmes, like sort of like, it's like when people from SNL are on, people love to hear about that audition, and
or just any of the comedians in
yeah.
general. I love hearing that like behind the scenes stuff. And I think that's another thing that I liked about this movie, not only from the SNL standpoint, but just from a comedy standpoint. Like, I like seeing movies about stuff that like where I can't get that information elsewhere. Like I can't think of another improv comedy movie that I've seen that's going to be like as devoted to the concept of improv comedy, like as an art form, as this one was. So I just thought that was interesting. I'm kind of circling the airport here because I'm trying to think of what I want, what I still want to give this movie. Because like I enjoyed it.
Right.
I think I enjoyed it more after the fact. I think I remember leaving the theater and being like, well, that wasn't too great. And I remember feeling kind of awkward when Mike Birbiglia came out, because I didn't like want him to like see it. I didn't want him to like see in my face that I hadn't enjoyed it like maybe like as much as he was like hoping I would have. But I think the genius of it sort of sets in the more I let it sit. I'm torn between two numbers. I'm not sure. I think I'll go with a 3.5 fingers.
Yeah,
I think I might have gone with a 2.5 or a 3 if you'd asked me like 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Okay.
But I think it's settled in nicely. And maybe it's a little inflated because the theater experience was just kind of once in a lifetime for us and fun and unique. And just having like a personal, affection for Mike Birbiglia as an artist before this movie. I still don't think he's maybe the greatest filmmaker. I think he's definitely more of a stand-up genius in certain ways. But I think this does just fine.
But Jillian Jacobs sitting like a foot in front of us is
Hot.
yeah, real hot,
Real hot.
real hot.
So that would come out to 3.75, which would round down to 3.5 fingers.
3.5
3.5 fingers.
sounds good.
Not bad.
Not bad at all.
All right. So,
So,
3.5 fingers for, what was the movie called? Don't Think Twice.
Don't think twice. What is this, 8th grade English class?
Yeah. Special thanks to our special guest, Mike Birbiglia. Thanks for being on the podcast, Mike. Yeah, I just want to say, fuck Joe.
Hey, I just want to say, what a fucking really unintelligent question I asked on a Q&A. Fuck you, Joe. Oh, thank you,
dare
Mike.
you.
It's been a real pleasure having you on here.
Just before we close out, make sure you buy some koozies and enter the contest while you still can. Submissions are open until August 25th. You can buy your koozies at howmanyfingerspodcast.com. Click the web store link or go to howmanyfingerspodcast.bigcartel.com. Just want to throw that in there before we sign out.
Nice. I like it.
Yeah, that's good.
I'm glad you threw that in there. Go buy a koozie, guys. They're tight.
Yeah. So signing out for How Many Fingers the Podcast, I'm Mike.
I'm Joe.
And I'm Mike. Fuck you, Joe.